Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Exxat-ly Podcast. My name is Brooke McIntosh, and I'll be your host today. And this is an episode that I am particularly excited about. Today, we're going to dive into the story and how these two incredible leaders that we have on the podcast with us today, Laura Smith, who is the Nursing Placement Coordinator at Johns Hopkins Hospital, and Lori Harris, who is the Director of Student Placements at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, how they came together to really help create kind of the first of its kind collaborative in the Maryland and DC space for nursing schools and clinical partners to come together to really tackle clinical placements. So like I said, together they've brought, a lot of hospitals, even, some outpatient facilities, lots of nursing programs, and, some of their allied partners as well, together into one big connected network that's really been built off of shared goals and communication. And truly, I've, had the opportunity of seeing like the innovation that this group has really brought forward in the nursing realm. So today we're going to talk about how this all came to be, what they've accomplished so far, any advice that they have, for others who are, looking to jump into a collaborative together, or, maybe they're a little scared. They're kind of thinking of this on the outskirts. But let's jump in. Lori and Laura, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us. This is fun and exciting. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's jump in. Let's start. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. So how did this idea for a collaborative in your area first come to life?
So we started kind of all discussing the work in silos, right? Like I would have a conversation with an academic partner as a being on the hospital side, and you would say like, well, this other hospital does it this way, and then this hospital does it this way. And then I kept just scratching my head being like, why do we do it this way? And this is weird. Yeah, that is weird. I don't know why they make you do that. And so I had that conversation a lot, and I had it with all of the schools that I worked with. And then I realized I also didn't know my counterparts at any hospital. It was like, I didn't know who was doing my work at their local hospital or who was helping to place the students. So I was like curious about that. I was curious if we did these things the same, or why couldn't we do things the same? And so I just became really curious. And then the work is frustrating, right? So it became curious.
And it's not an easy job. Yeah.
We became frustrated. And so the more and more we had that conversation, we just were like, okay, what can we do? Can we do anything? And around that same time is when Lori reached out and identified that there was some struggles with the current process that we had in place. And
that was between the program that Lori works at and your hospital?
All of them. Well, it was like with the vendor.
All of them? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just the process of getting the students from school into a clinical setting, right? So, and it was a system that we were using, and it just struggled. Like we really had a hard time about it. So, my quick answer to your question would be like, well, we all came, around something that we all disliked the most. And Lori initiated a meeting of the minds, essentially invited everyone to University of Maryland and said, do we all agree? So Lori, what was your motivation to get that meeting going?
Well, as you said, Laura, it was like, why do we do this way? And then it just got to the point with like, we can't continue to do it this way. So it just wasn't working. The system was collapsing. And so we just invited everyone and said, hey, let's come and talk about how we make this process better.
All right. So you threw out a wild invite for anyone who wanted to come in and join. Who showed up? How'd you get buy-in? Like how many people showed up in the beginning?
It was actually a pretty good number. Again, it was just the right time. Everyone was just at their moment, like this can't work, but we didn't have a way to figure out how to make it work, how to make it better. So it was a pretty good turnout.
Yeah, we just asked like all of our partners to like dig into their address book. Like, who is it that you reach out to at this hospital to get placements? And so we added them to the list. And who does that hospital work with in schools? And so it became this very like networking collaboration already. And so when we finally, and as we know, like this work in terms of placing the students has a lot of turnover.
Yeah.
And so when we thought we had like a good list, we realized we didn't. So we got all the appropriate people, as many as we could, kind of at the table. And it started off like super informal. And we all quickly agreed on pursuing a new process and a new vendor and a new platform to do it with, which is obviously how we landed meeting with Exxat. But That was, again, that really did initiate our time together. And then we all realized that we had other problems that we shared, and maybe that should be kind of new. So we did a bunch of discussions about what are the big issues, what are the small issues, and then I think some problems were solved even that day, right? Like some people were like, "Well, I did it this way," and they're like, "Well, that makes a lot of sense." And then like,
we could consider that too.
Yeah. So, and it really, after like the first few meetings, I think, Lori, we finally were just like, we all agree we got to keep doing this, right? Like just keep showing up and we'll feel like it'll kind of become clear the path we need to take and how we're going to do this. And so that's really how it started. It was just a lot of emails, a lot of chit chat, and just like inviting people. And if they showed up, great, you know.
Yeah. So it sounds like there was a mix of vision and persistence and a lot of relationship building. And like you said, digging into your address book, who knows who else has these problems. So once the concept itself was kind of in motion, I can only imagine that that's really where the tough work kind of started, like bringing all of those moving pieces together. Right. So
actually really, sort of easy because everyone was struggling with the same problems. And so find a place to talk about those.
Yeah. So when you put all those steps on paper, right, you had outlined what all your problems were. What was like the first step? You said that you solved some of these problems maybe on like the first day. So like, what were some of the first steps that you took to like make this real? So, you were scheduling meetings, like, it can't just be the two of you always, right? So like, how did you kind of take these issues that you were having, these people who were, showing up because they care and they knew that something needed to change? Kind of what were some of those first couple of steps that you took to make this real?
I think Laura's biggest thing was we have a lot of problems. We need to start prioritizing them and then have these groups to concentrate on. Who has the passion to go after that? Because honestly, it's a volunteer. No, we have our full-time jobs as it is. So it was like, who has the passion for solving this problem? Who will take on something additional to get it done? So Laura really did put some order into it instead of all of us to keeping it from devolving to a place where we just vented about our
which is nice to have, but it's not going to
nice to have, right? It gets old after a while. And so she really provided a structure so that we could start moving towards some solutions. And my passion, of course, was finding a software with help with our placement issues.
Yeah, I think we did like the first few meetings, and we did a lot of surveys and poll everywheres, and I really my biggest goal wasn't necessarily like, let's make this big and solve a lot of problems. It was like, let's make this a collective decision. Like, I didn't want it to come in and be like, this is all about me and what I think, like what works for me in my hospital. And I know Lori felt the same. Like, she's like, it's not just about Maryland. Like, and so we really, one of my initial goals getting people together were like, okay, here's what we were struggling with. Like, I can't even remember the questions, and then we said, okay, of these issues, what is most important? And then people were just like, pulling. In the meetings, we were like, okay, our first focus will be the platform. And then our second focus is this. And so then it kind of dwindled down into some objectives. And then those objectives, then like we were talking about with the subcommittees. And then, so once everyone agreed, now again, it wasn't perfect, but once everyone agreed and once, we all kind of had the same set of, okay, here's what we need to work on. It was easier to split the work up, because that goes without saying, like, obviously, Lori, like, it's not a one person's job to do this.
Or a 2-person or a 3-person.
Exactly, yeah. So we split the work up. I keep saying this story too of, like, we all agreed that our first goal was to agree upon a vendor to get the students where they needed to go. We may not agree on what it is that they're putting in that system, but at least they're all like using the same platform to do it. And so I really didn't think that we were going to see a ton of progress on some of the other subcommittees. I just wanted everyone to, again, like, feel involved and feel like they're contributing. And some of those other subcommittees, like, took it to the hills. Like, I couldn't get over how quickly some of them were saying, well, we're going to develop this, and we've reviewed all the affiliation agreements. And I was like, oh.
Yeah. So Laura, what were some of those other things? So you said a platform, right, for being able to manage clinical education. What were some of those other, big ticket or, hot topic items, that you guys were discussing early on?
The timing of the requests was a really big deal initially, meaning we all kind of came into the work with our own assumptions. Like I came in being trained in one way, and I found out in meeting of this that nobody else worked that way. And I was like, oh, like, my decision-making process, framework and everything, the timelines I used were old.
For when you were offering placements, when schools were making requests,
well, yeah, they were just
kind of all the above.
Because I never talked to my colleagues on the hospital side, especially, I just assumed everyone was doing it my way. Wrong. So that was another one. So the timing of things, schools were explaining about how they were logging in every morning to just see if there was anything available to request.
Like the Hunger Games.
It was very Hunger Games, yes. And so I was like, oh my God.
Lori, from the school side, it was Hunger Games.
And that's they're like, they had like multiple screens up and I was like, oh my gosh, I did not understand that. So that was another problem, was the timing of the request. So we thought about, let's create a calendar so we can all agree upon all the hospitals will have their options in by a certain date, and then schools can request after a certain date. We talked a lot about the partnerships, which is a longer discussion. So that was part of it. So communication, calendar, timing was a big one. The other one is just the compliance requirements, right? So the variability between each site that these poor students went to and the nuance between what's acceptable at one place and not acceptable elsewhere was also a hot topic. So that was what another subcommittee became. And then I think I really advocated for the last one because I think it's because I had been working with our new nurse residency program. Mm-hmm. Meaning I would work with the students after they became nurses and started their first jobs, right? So I think the reason I put in I really advocated for us to focus on the scope. So the nursing students practice and instructor practice and scope, because it's not well defined. Every site they go to, they have a whole different experience, even within the same health system. So that was something that I remember advocating for it. And again, thinking we don't need to work on this for a couple of years. I really was like, we can slow roll it, but let's catch a vision for what we could do here. And then turns out they caught it and went with it. So those were some of the other ones. There was there's some really isolated things that people can really focus on, but we got to kind of keep bringing it up to a higher level of view. I think that was helpful for us because with any of the, they can get really granular. So we just kind of having to come back to bigger picture and not make a decision based upon one hospital or one school. Even the calendar was hard because everyone's academic calendars are a bit different. So we kind of had to keep bringing back, can you tolerate it if it's on this day instead of 2 weeks earlier?
Yeah. And giving kind of those time frames, right?
Exactly. It's not and we all just kept saying, this is not mandatory. No one's going to be double checking that you have all this in. It's just an accountability step. We're all here because we all agree it needs to be better. So, that's where that was some of the earlier discussions.
And I think too, being together, we also understood the barriers and identifying who were the decision makers as far as how it worked in the site partners versus how it worked in the academic. So we could help each other to bounce off ideas of how we get these policies and procedures pushed through with the least amount of red tape. And it always helped to come in and say, I met with all of my other sister nursing schools and they've agreed to this.
Yeah. So can we agree to this?
Mm-hmm.
There's power in numbers, right?
Power in numbers. Absolutely.
So I've heard you both kind of mention a couple of times how every school, every site, had their own way of doing things, their own policies, their own calendars, sometimes even, their own terminology, their own way, of describing certain things. So how did you navigate those differences and, really getting people to agree on a path forward? Did you take it to a vote? Did you just make recommendations and, hope that people, would come along with them? I'm really thinking of this from a lens of other people who may be thinking about this, but they're worried about having to overcome some of those, challenges because they are challenging.
I think we did a lot of talking. I think that we created space for people to all come. I know that was a goal of mine because I really did not want anyone to say, well, Hopkins, again, my employer is making me do this. And I really did not want that to be the picture or any type of impression. And so I remember sometimes we talked about the same thing for so many meetings. And so that didn't feel productive, but I do think it helped build a really good foundation, to be a little cliche, but for us to like make some rapid progress later, because we did build in a bit of trust. And we would hear from our hospital partners saying, well, we want to do what's good. What do you guys think at the school side? Like there was just a lot of awareness that our goal was the same and that we weren't out to like get each other, right? Like we took, again, back to Hunger Games, we took that kind of fight portion out of it, but we did talk about a lot. We made sure everyone had a voice. We made sure that everyone felt like their opinion was necessary. And then we did have to push back on some things, right? Like we did have to say like, all right, so for most of us, this kind of concept will work. And the people who felt like, oh, it's not going to work for me, maybe took a little bit longer to adapt, but they did ultimately find their place and how they could adjust their own workflow to kind of accommodate this different thing. So, and we talked about that from the top. We kept going back to our mission and vision, right? And our objectives. Like we all agreed, this is where we're going. And then we also said like, everyone's going to need to change a workflow. Like your current workflow isn't working, which is why we're all here. So don't think about how we can make these changes to fit into how you do things now. What do we have to change to kind of accommodate for the group? And I remember saying that a lot. Laura, what else did we?
Oh, yes, Laura's the phrase for most of us became the way we knew that we were coming to a decision, and rightfully so. But I agree about what Laura says, to make sure everybody had input and the trust, because we were right at the pivot of making a decision about a vendor, and a few people said we didn't feel like it was inclusive enough, or that we really thought about it. So we thought, all right. So we started all over again, which I think was it did feel like, oh, wow, there was a lot of work. But I do think for the result at the end is that everyone felt as if they all had a part in evaluating vendors for the platform, and the enthusiasm and finally jumping in to make it work was worth it.
Yeah, so it sounds like from your structure, kind of the two of you raised your hands early on to say, we got to figure something out, right? And then you've broken out into subcommittees, right? So I heard you mention that earlier. But how many subcommittees do you have?
We have 4 subcommittees. We ended up having about 6 different objectives, and then our subcommittees were born from those objectives.
Okay,
and
awesome.
So 4 subcommittees. Each subcommittee we just call it a point of contact. Like by no means is it like a director or nobody's in charge. Like again, the goal was just like, who is
collaboration?
Right. Who is willing to make sure you guys meet? Like that was the only requirement, to like schedule a meeting as routinely as we can. And that was kind of the requirement to become a point of contact. But I mean, it goes without saying, like we've had several people just kind of like rise up, own what they're doing, really take it like, because they can see how it will impact their work and other work. And so then some people don't have much capacity to contribute too much. And also that's fine. And so, but that is where, we kind of tried to organize it and make smaller stepping stones to get to those objectives.
Okay. Yeah. So what I hear from you is don't overcomplicate it. Like there is power in, putting problems out there, letting people raise their hand. Worked really great for you guys. And so, I just want anyone who's out there listening, who is contemplating doing this or, trying to rally people together, it works, right? I think what I just keep hearing both of you say is to not overcomplicate it.
I think just listening to each other. And like one of the other things I'll say is I think what we don't formally acknowledge a lot is like how the student work is always just like clumped with somebody else's job. Like there's not really a specific role that's coordinator. Everyone who does the work has a different set of criteria coming to the table.
Yep.
And so that can feel like really confusing. And it can make you either feel like I am the decision maker, or it could be like, I can't decide upon any of this. And so I think it kind of gave us this like feeling that we could be bigger in numbers. We can come and represent the work that we're doing and why we're asking for it, because also other hospitals across the state are struggling with the same thing. So we could take some of that experience and what we're learning there back to our organizations, which I mean, it's again, a little cliche, but like it did feel very empowering to kind of give us a stronger voice when we came to say like, we can't have 20 piles of paper around our office, like an 85 page PDF requirement. Like I need a better way to do it. So it did help, I think, our confidence with our management.
That's great. So much of this sounds like building trust just as much as building structure, right? So let's talk a little bit about what's come out of this foundation so far. So, some of kind of the early wins, some of the impacts that you guys have already seen. So I'll start with just that. What have been some of the most meaningful accomplishments that you guys have, had so far since you started together? And also, when did you first start? When did you guys have your first meeting? I should have asked that earlier.
So I think we came together, it was early 2022. So it was right after the whole landscape had changed after, lockdown, right after COVID. And it was like, that's when it became very clear that it could not continue in that, in the way that we, were doing it. And I think one of our biggest accomplishments are two the things that we've mentioned. We did find, a hosting platform for the MDDC area. So that was one of our major goals. And for me, the calendar and having that kind of expectation of when availability will be there, when we can go and ask, and then when, also very importantly, expect an answer, yes or no, so that we can produce a calendar, a schedule earlier for students. And the students really appreciate that because now they have both their class schedule and clinical schedule, and they can plan the rest of their life around it. So I know the calendar for me has been huge impact for our students.
Yeah. So thinking, again, if people are out there thinking about doing this in the future, how far in advance, I'm going to ask a technical question about how far in advance of a placement do your calendars open up? So if it's for like January 2026 placements or, around that time frame, how far in advance are those requests being made?
They are being made like 3 or 4 months in advance, right?
Right.
No, I guess 3. Yeah. So when it comes to a spring placement, so like everybody coming in spring doing clinical group placements, we typically request them early to mid-October. And but again, that requires me as a hospital to like build them all out and make sure that they're ready to be requested. It requires the schools to have concept of how many groups am I going to need? What's obviously like even need, like what courses are we needing? What sites are we needing? And then obviously then you have to hire people. So having that information, even if it's not 100%, right? Like obviously group sizes are going to change. We may have to drop one. We may have to add some. And so, but if they can get a bulk of that done early enough, like it really does help. Obviously the onboarding, the timing, like, in this work, January is always a wild time. January, February, like,
bananas. Yeah.
It can help take off some of the bulk of the work then. And then that way they're dealing with like the finer pieces of it. I think that that is where the calendar is really nice. And that's why we do it so far in advance, because obviously there's a lot of requirements and students have a lot of questions, bless them. But there's some a little space for that. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're all here for, right? Is to make sure that we are teaching and graduating, qualified nurses or allied health professionals, healthcare professionals across the board. So thinking about the collaborative and how the experience has changed. And I mean, I honestly didn't realize that it had only been a handful of years at this point. I like watching you guys come in.
I think we started having all of those like siloed conversations in 2022.
Yeah.
We didn't have our first like formal meeting where we were polling on our objectives till April of 23.
Yes.
Like that's when I looked back at my stuff recently. So yeah, like
so from the outside looking in, I would have thought, first of all, that you were some well-funded, like very executive level organization. I mean, I've been lucky enough, to attend a few of your meetings, and I just, of course, I boast on you all because I don't know that I've seen anyone who has done, what this group has done, with the resources or lack thereof, that you all have. So just again, thinking about the collaborative in this experience, what do you think what has changed, whether it be for the students, the faculty, clinical partners? I know you guys have mentioned, the calendar, but, positively, hopefully not negatively, but, how do you feel like the collaborative has, kind of helped to change this narrative and this experience for all of you?
I think one of the things is understanding where it works better when we're not in silos, right?
Yeah.
It works better and supporting each other. And as Laura mentioned, with the turnover and it is a hard position. When someone new comes along, it's like, hey, we're here. We're all here to support you. So come on in and let's
Yeah.
just talk about how all of this works. So I
And they don't have to start from scratch, right?
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah,
have to
that would
start.
be actually an interesting dynamic to look at. I hadn't thought about it. Like, what's the turnover rate for those of us been doing this work since they've been involved in the collaborative? I'll have to
Yeah.
look into that.
Mm.
I think the thing that I'm not surprised that my response is going to be less like logistics and it's just more relational. Like most of us are teams of 1, 2, 3. Like if there's like small amount of people doing this work, like they always say, Laura, can your team do this? And I'm like, sure.
Yes. Let me ask my team, Laura, can you do this?
So it gives me the feeling of having some colleagues. And I think that's really helpful. And I think that now that we know the faces behind some of the
Yes.
people we're contacting, I think that brings some more capacity to the patients that we maybe have for that other partner. Or being more direct if you were feeling like, I don't know if I can ask that. And it's like, just ask them. They say no, so I think that again, it's kind of the trust factor is coming back too, I think, but it's kind of just given us a bit of like a co-worker kind of experience, especially when it can feel a little lonely, or all you're dealing with are complaining students, et cetera. So I think that has been kind of an incidental finding is just like the networking and the camaraderie that we're pulling out of it, I think is supporting us more than we realize.
That's great.
I am thinking back about like what the turnover rate could have.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to get those data points. Now we'll have to look at the happiness scale for people who have this job now. So honestly, I mean, I'm still a little flabbergasted. I can't believe I didn't ask this question before about how long you guys have been doing it. But, it really does, sound like it took shape really, really quickly. And I mean, it's just incredible the work that you guys have done. So let's, pull out our crystal balls and let's look ahead into the future. Kind of what's next for the collaborative, kind of as you continue to build on, the work that you've already done. So I'll just ask a very blanketed question, the $1 million question. You picked a vendor, right? You have kind of solidified kind of what some of your processes are for the low hanging fruit, right? Like what were just some of the big issues that you guys were having? What are your goals for this next kind of phase of the collaborative? And what does success look like for you guys over the next year or two?
I think success, I mean, I think some of our goals, we kind of got to the point where we can actually reevaluate those first objectives. And we're saying, do these still apply? What have we accomplished that we can revise and maybe fine tune? So short term, we're working on like revising our objectives for the next couple of years for us to focus on. So we can, if we need to kind of redirect a little bit, we can, or if there's a new priority that has come up, we can obviously have an opportunity to do that. We are in the process of applying for some grant funding to help
Awesome.
support it. We got to define what that means, right? So part of it, when we've been kind of high level thinking about it, it's supporting some of the administrative work. I mean, communicating with all the people and scheduling and hosting these meetings and events that we all find very valuable is, all has a cost. The other thing that we would really like to do is like help with the professional development of the clinical placement coordinators. So supporting their attending conferences or what other type of trainings or other type of councils that they could be part of. I think that could be a big impact. And then just establishing our input. Somebody was like, well, who's going to make this kind of stuff mandatory? And there really isn't a body, not that we want everything mandatory, but somebody to like be able to be a voice in a structured organization that people will be like, oh, well, the collaborative or the Maryland DC collaborative is suggesting we pursue it this way. And so they can go to their organizations with confidence saying, we have this backing. So that's where I see it going. I mean, Lori and I agree. We've been talking about it a lot, but what are we missing, Lori? Yeah.
So I'm always, yes, I'm always for the data, right? So now that we have, all of these large hospital systems in there, all of the, nursing programs, what is it, how what are we underutilizing, either from the school side or the hospital side and capacity? Where else where we need more capacity is, the demand exceeding what, our site partners can provide. So I'm really all into the data that we have collected.
Yeah, I heard at the last collaborative meeting, I was just listening, and I heard someone saying, well, if we could move the peds rotations to Thursdays, I could take more of your students. And someone was like, I could move that to Thursdays. And it was like, right there, we found capacity. I just thought that was like, it's simple, but we don't I have lived on the school side and the site side in previous lives of, managing student placements very different in PT than it is in nursing. But I was like, I guess I could have just asked, right? Like, I could have told them, or, kind of just asked more questions. So I think that that's super special. I'm really looking forward to, diving into that data. Maybe that's our next episode with you on, like, kind of what some of these outcomes are.
Yeah.
But,
early on, back to the data though, on, a lot of the questions that I was like, well, I wonder, like, could I take more? Like, as a hospital, like, I'm like, could I take more groups? And I couldn't even answer that question. Like, I was like, is my hospital operating at a capacity to manage what we need in the area? So we started to collect some data towards that, but that's where we'd like to fund that too, is to find somebody who actually is a data analyst, because I am not. Yeah. So I think, so that was something like that question we could not answer, right? Like, we knew the demands better, right? Enrollment, graduation, all that stuff. But we were like I looked at my colleague at a different hospital and I was like, how many groups could you take? And she was like, I don't know, like, these units take them. And I was like, what about all these units that don't take students? And she was like, I don't know.
Yeah. So being able to track that though, like at a minimum, to be able to share some of that data back.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so cool. So do you guys see this expanding at all? Maybe to other disciplines, additional schools or sites, or maybe even beyond Maryland and DC?
Well, one of the carrots that we thought about for our site partners is, of course, they have other students than just nursing students, right? And so one of the things that we wanted to make sure of is that whatever they built for nursing students would also apply to their other allied health students coming in. So we do expect that once we get, because our goal is to start putting in the advanced practice nursing students into there, that then they will continue to expand to be able to track their capacity for all of their disciplines that they host.
Okay, great. So with all of the progress and the possibility that we've seen so far, I have to only imagine that people that are listening and are wondering, how they could replicate this process, whether they're in nursing, PTOT, surgery tech, whatever it may be, any other healthcare education programs. So for those who are listening and who are, thinking about this, what advice would you give to them? Where should they start?
I think it's in making sure that, what's the expression of having the right people on the bus, right? Like, that the people who are doing the work and know the work, and then also balancing that with those who really have the influence in the decision. Like, I think that for a long time, some of these decisions were happening at a really high level, and it just would trickle down to whoever could grab it to complete the job. And so I think getting the right people on board, right? Who's doing the work, who knows the barriers and the bottlenecks, and who can offer a solution, right? Like, just like Lori said earlier, like, we didn't want to just come and just keep complaining about what was hard about it. It was like, okay, yeah, we all agree this is a pain. What can we do for it? So the right people in the room is important. I do think getting people in a room together is also important, whether that's a Zoom room, but this isn't going to be done over email is probably like a good way to think about it. Like, the connection is really valuable. And I think the trust factor is contributing, is part of that. And I think being open to consistently evaluating, is what we're doing working? What should we change?
Taking that feedback. Yeah.
And like, obviously there's ebbs and flows, and education is very cyclical, right? So you can anticipate a lot, but there are offshoots. It's like, oh wait, we need to pivot and do this. And I think giving us the freedom to say, we can try this for a little while, and if it doesn't work, we can reevaluate it. Like, there's nobody saying that once it's in place, it's got to stay there forever. And I think that took a lot of the pressure off too, for those people who were like a little worried. So again, it's just a lot of talking.
Yeah.
And for better, like, again, that was good for me. I enjoyed that part of it immensely, in making those relationships. So I do think it's a balance between making sure people can feel heard and that their opinions are involved, but also being like not afraid to say,
moving things along, right?
Yeah. Let's keep it along. Exactly. And I think I was surprised at how well I did on some of that, because we had to manage some pretty difficult conversations from time to time. And so I think having somebody or people who can be more confident to say, all right, let's steer back here or put a pin in it, there's always offline conversations that people need to have. So that's what that is, I think the consideration of a structure that can be translatable to different regions and to different discipline. I think that is something that, like right now, I think we can speak to it pretty well, but I don't know how well like documented or that is. So that is an interesting concept to think about how it could be adapted in other settings, even regions. Like I think geographically we work pretty well because we're a little squished and condensed here in Maryland. But what does that mean for other parts of the regions too? So,
yeah. Lori, anything? Any advice?
Laura said it very well, but the most important thing is the consistency and the trust that when
consistency,
there will be a product, you will see your contribution in what the decisions are.
Yeah. And so you had both kind of mentioned earlier is that this is not your full-time job, right? You have another job outside of, trying to corral and bring everyone together. So what have you learned about really sustaining this collaboration when everyone's juggling so many different competing priorities? So any advice kind of in that realm of, maybe it is that consistency piece, Lori, that you were talking to, but any advice there?
Well, I think the fact that we have a schedule and it's not requiring people to, be somewhere at a whole lot. The people who have the compassion and the dedication to do that, that's what they jumped in. But the rest of everyone else were like, basically once a month we get together, and that's reasonable. That's what people think. That's something that they could commit to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think too, it's important. Pretty early on, we thankfully had a lot of support from some of our state organizations. Like the Maryland Hospital Association was very involved pretty early. And so that gave us a little bit of confidence to, like, I was able to go to, internally within my current organization saying, I'm going to be tucking out and doing some work over here because of these are the bigger pictures that we're looking at. So I have a lot of support from my organization, even though the work feels like outside of my typical defined work that I should be doing. It obviously is contributing to that. And then, everyone in leadership and nursing leadership in any capacity knows that this is not an easy portion of the job. And so I think that was also really helpful. So I think making sure that the organizations that are being represented there are aware of what's happening and the why behind it, I think will also support the sustainability of it. Like as long as the organizations are still able to allow their staff and their people to go attend an offsite meeting for 8 hours and pay them for that day, I think that's going to help contribute to it, to sustainability without a doubt. So it's being sure that the organizations are aware.
Yeah, I mean, that's really practical and encouraging, quite honestly. Having those conversations early and often, with your leadership, with your surrounding teammates. And I think whenever you can come back with some of those, concrete, items that you guys have checked off the list, right? Problems that you've solved, time that, they have potentially saved, from going to these meetings and being a part of this. Like that we said before, like the data doesn't lie, right? So, being able to share that back. So before we wrap up, I have one more question for you both. Anyone who's ever worked in clinical education, I say we're like the bleeding hearts of these groups. Like it is not an easy job. And so, just thinking kind of back on this journey so far, can you both, share kind of what has this journey meant to both of you, either, professional or personally, or both with the work that you've been able to do over the last couple of years?
Well, for me, I'm very happy about the effect that it's had on the students. It's an easier onboarding process. it's an easier compliance process. They are getting their schedules earlier. So I have happier students and students who are hopefully better prepared once they get to the site. So eventually that's, on the academic end, as I partner, students who want to finish the journey to being a nurse.
Yeah, I think this type of work is also unique because it's not like people are like selecting to go to school to get their clinical placement degree, so it's like kind of unique. And so when I first started this job, it was due to like family reasons. Like it gave me a lot of flexibility and it gave me the ability to work at home. Right. And I had small kids. And so I didn't do it because of like love and passion for student placements. But what I've really appreciated is understanding the value that the job is. And it took a little while because again, at first I didn't really care. Like I was like, nope, this is getting the job done and I can stay home and take care of my family. But it's really been helpful for me to appreciate the value that this work does, right? Like students become nurses. And if they come to clinical and love it at my hospital and they learn a lot, then they're going to be like, I'm going to want to go work there, right? Like, and they're going to want to turn around and come back. And so really understanding the value, I think that the student process and bringing students in and placing them is been the most valuable thing for me because I can see it more than just like appreciate that I have the flexibility of the work. So I think that has been great. That has been a surprise that I don't probably only verbalize the first time right now. So,
well, thank you for choosing to share it with us. Yeah. So, well, Laura, Lori, thank you both so much for sharing your story, your process, and also everything that you're doing to strengthen the nursing workforce through, innovation. Truly, this is very innovative, and the collaboration of the collaborative. So for our listeners, if you'd like to learn more about this group in our show notes, we will put some more information, about how you can contact them, to learn more or to kind of keep up with all the innovation that they have over at the MDDC. And I'm Brooke McIntosh, and this has been another episode of Exxat-ly. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.